Kenny Kelly, as always, it is a delight for me to have you on Unbroken. Our talks are viewed many, many times. People adore you. You have such wisdom to impart. And so thanks for being here again.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you to everybody out there who watches this because I'm really committed to helping people make a change in consciousness. And and most people are like, what? So, so I hope you get something out of this.
Yeah. Well, definitely we all will, including myself. So you said it, you said consciousness. So maybe let's start there because things are happening. The world is changing right now before our eyes. There was there was a totalitarian power grab there's still intent for that. Structures are collapsing, in my view. People are waking up because of the overreach and the craziness. The social engineering has gotten to a point that, you know, 2 plus 2 equals 5 now. You know, if you're a woman, you can be a man, and 5 minutes later, a woman. I mean, the cray is just so strong that
Yeah.
I think this is a really important time to give people advice on, how do we navigate this? And so, since you're an expert on consciousness, and I think that is key, why don't you speak a little bit to that?
Okay, I would start with the idea that um, each one of us is a little ball of consciousness, and we're rolling through the world, and we're picking up information and ideas, and we're watching and we're listening. And if the ideas coming in are really what I call destructive interference, I don't know if people know how frequencies work, but you have two frequencies. They either destruct, they provide destructive interference or they provide constructive interference. And sometimes they produce binaural frequencies, and frequencies are consciousness. It's just that simple. They hold the consciousness. The frequency itself determines what kind of consciousness you can have, how that's going to unfold, how you'll behave, what you will feel, all of that. And we really have to make a paradigm shift, I guess I'll say, in terms of our understanding of how we're made and how we operate and what is the nature of reality, the true nature, because we're not anywhere close to what how it really operates. And so there's a lot of stumbling and there's a lot of things falling apart because we're so we are evolving and the system is not. So that complicates it even further. So when this little ball of frequencies is rolling through the world, it's picking up some destructive, some constructive, and some interactive frequencies. And all of that changes who we are and how we are. And we want it to change because the old stuff um, got, there's an attempt to make that not work very well. I'll put that mildly. And it's been very, very destructive. It has caused arrested development. We're designed to evolve. We're kind of like when you put an acorn in the ground and you put some water and it's in the dark, that little acorn swells and then it starts to change all of its chemistry and then it starts to search for, okay, where can I put out a root so I can, still take what I need from this physical system. But then up comes this magnificent tree and it follows the branches, and the pattern of branching follows the pattern of energies coming out of the earth, which spiral out of the earth. Um, that that's what we're designed to do. Get more and more grounded at the same time that we begin reaching for, okay, let's expand the whole consciousness. Let's see what else, let's branch out. Who else is out there? What are they saying? What are the possibilities? And all of that life is a system, and we're in that system. And all of that is designed to bring us into, I'm going to say, more and more beautiful states of consciousness. And some of that has to be by conscious choice. You can't just, sit back and say, take me away or beam me up, Scotty, or whatever. All of that is something that we have to go after. We have to choose. We have to watch and see, okay, how does this work? What is this information telling me? And because we don't have very good critical thinking anymore, that's not happening. So we're in a rough spot right now. And I see that we're turning the corner. I get so excited. I see I spend a lot of my time following, searching for what's happening in new forms of government, what's happening in new forms of money, what's happening in new forms of education, new science, new technology, the whole universe of people out there, what's happening with business, what's happening, in relationships, etc. All of it is changing, and I see the threads that are beginning to weave together into something brand new. And all the things we have that we're afraid we're going to lose or that somebody's going to take away, all of those things will still be there on I'm going to say, a much less intrusive pattern, in a much less intrusive pattern, a much less polluting kind of system, whether you're talking about energy or manufacturing or whatever, food, much more nutritious, much easier on the earth. Transport, same thing. Everything is, we have all the pieces right there, but a lot of the people that I know that are doing those things are actually sitting on them right now because they're waiting for the old system to come apart. They know if they put their head above the wall, they're going to get their head taken off. And they don't want that. They want to be there to catch us when the new system finally has some legs under it too, and doesn't have to worry about being taken out. So I see this wonderful change coming with a world that is so much smoother. And the last thing I'll say is that there's a change because we are frequency creatures. When you mess around with the frequencies, you change the consciousness of the individual. So we've all been subjected to this medicine in the arm that has, I'm just going to say very bluntly and not explain too much at this point. That medicine is designed to be attracted to receptors that receive light. And that's a very simplified kind of description of what's been going on. When you can't take in light is what triggers a lot of the interactions in the body. And so we've had this blocking of light, and you'll hear people say, as soon as I got that medicine in the arm, I felt like something shut down, like I couldn't get in touch with the spirit of myself. Well, yeah, that's what light does. It keeps that spirit of yourself and that whole set of frequencies that you are working in a way that is evolving. And so that gets shut off right away. And then there's other bad effects that happen. But there's that. And then the other thing is that the planet is going through some big plasma sheets right now in the cosmos. The whole solar system is moving through the cosmos at, I think it's 70,000 kilometers per hour. That's fast. That's very fast. So those plasma sheets, that affects our frequency. And then you have the sun doing certain things. Those affect our frequency. And then we have the planet herself is, there's all kinds of change. Every so often the planet is a living being and she has to reorganize herself. And the, what we call the electromagnetic region around the planet changes. That affects our frequency. When that goes bananas, so do we. So it's a perfect storm in terms of consciousness. And I just want to tell people, just ride out the storm. It's not the end of the world. It's just the end of a system that was not very good. So many bad legacies from that old system. So
Yeah.
just, ride it out.
That's interesting, because, you and I both know there's been social engineering for a long time through all the different systems, whether it be education or media or medicine, to lower our consciousness, to eliminate critical thinking, to sever the love that we have for each other. It's interesting, the thing that went in the arm also mainly affects the heart, right? So
Yeah.
that's not a surprise to me. So this has been deliberately done. And so we just have to acknowledge that, first of all, right? So, but the old dark system is crumbling, and I do agree with you. There are galactic cycles and sun cycles, and there different people have named them. Some have called it the Kali Yuga, like the dark cycle. This Russian guy Levchov called it the night of the Svarog, and said that around between 2012 and 2020, we'd enter the day of the Svarog, so the light cycle. So that is happening, right? So we are getting galactic help, the planet, the galaxy. So light is being brought in more to counteract this darkness that we've been under. But we have that inside us. And the dark ones always knew this, and hence they worked so hard to devolve us. I mean, when I think about it, they have spent so many resources, so much time, so much effort to dumb us down and restrict our consciousness so that because we're so creative naturally, I think, so that we would help them create the dark world that we've been in, right? They use us as energy, as batteries. So I think right now, I feel it, this is shifting. And so now we have an opportunity to shift our own consciousness individually, which is where I think we start. And, I've done work on myself, and what I've found is the subconscious, right? The same experiences or thoughts, I liken it to driving on an on-ramp onto a freeway in the brain. So if you use that on-ramp all the time, it creates these grooves in your brain, and then you're just automatically doing that over and over. So that's something that I've worked on myself. I began by just watching, what is my thought? Or if I started to feel crappy in some way, I'd go, okay, why? Whoa, what's going on? Why is this emotion here? Why is this thought here? And then sometimes you have to let the emotion go. You have to let it release, right? Because it's trapped in here. So sometimes I would have to scream or cry and just get it out. But then afterwards, I would say, okay, what can I put in its place? What can I replace the thought with? What can I replace the emotion with? So I want you to speak to that, because I think that's really significant work. We have to basically deprogram our subconscious from the low frequency stuff and change that. So, I just gave one idea of like how I do it, but I see that everywhere. Raise your frequency, raise your frequency. So how can we raise our frequency?
Okay, so let me say a couple things before we say anything more about raising frequencies, because it's really not a raising at all. It's an expansion in all directions. Okay, so when Kundalini happened back at, in 78, 79, for me, what I discovered, I had been to college and had all the Freudian stuff and the Jungian stuff and all that kind of education. What became very clear, because I had 3 years of absolutely unlimited consciousness, unlimited, no boundaries, knew everything everybody was thinking, what they were feeling, knew what the future was going to be, could see the past, could see the whole cosmos. It was unlimited. And what became clear at that time, which I really wasn't ready for at all, was that there was no superconscious, and there was no real, conscious and subconscious. There were no divisions. And up to that point, up until Kundalini, I had always thought about it, talked about it as if there was this area called the superconscious, and then there was the conscious, and then there was the subconscious. And what happened in Kundalini was all of that was infinitely and instantly available. And it became clear that it was a choice. We were choosing. So when you come to that realization where there are no boundaries, no barriers, then what's the first question most people, well, what I asked, and then I also have heard others going through that saying the same thing. Well, something in me wants to choose that over there, but my family and my tradition and my body are all pulling in this direction. Well, how do I deal with that? What do I do? And so the point that I want to make is that within, I'm going to say a few hours, I'm going to say 72 hours of birth, the body habituates chemically. In other words, as soon as you're born, your frequencies kind of gel, and frequencies produce chemistry. Chemistry follows frequency. And so that if that first 72 hours is not really good, or it doesn't open that infant to the entire culture and reality right there in that first 72 hours, then that child is going to have to work at perception, is going to be somewhat retarded. I'm going to say it's probably 8 billion retarded people, and not retarded in the sense that we have used that term in the past, but our development slows. It slows down. And our physical development slows down. Our chemistry is habituated to limiting perceptions or limiting chemistry, and we end up getting pulled. Now, you can have, over the course of your life, you have other experiences and you open up a little bit, you fall in love. When we fall in love, that changes all of the chemistry. And you have scary experiences, and then you have cooperative moments and competitive moments. You have all these things that have an impact on you. But the thing that is operational, unless there's big development, is that habituation, that chemical habituation. And if something upsets you, scares you, makes you mad, you go right back to that early chemistry instantly. That is your body's first response to where the heck are we now and what is going on. And so that habituation is going to be there unless and until there's a felt change. In other words, you can think change all you want. Tell yourself, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to think that. But if you still have that, an early perception that is, something that happened when you were at birth, or 2 or 5 or 11 or whatever it was, you make decisions about yourself and life here based on those experiences. And when you're 2 or 5 or 11, you're not really, you don't have the perception, you don't have the wisdom, you don't have the experience to make really good decisions. So, you make poor decisions, and then those come up again and again. So you do have to go back to that original feeling, that original fright, that original embarrassment, that original helplessness, that moment of illumination when you realize, wow, this place, what, I think I made a mistake. Some people have said that to me. I think I came here by mistake. You have to go back and say, wait a minute, there's no mistakes. You had a reason. What were you thinking? What's the actual task that you came here to do or to learn? And as soon as you feel that, and you have to feel everything that goes with it, the fright, the fear, the anger, the helplessness, the embarrassment, the, whatever. As soon as you feel that, it changes all of the frequency relationships, which then changes the consciousness. So when we talk about raising consciousness, what we're really talking about is examining the core of a decision, the core of a feeling, and going back to get to the very bottom of that, decide if that's still a valid perception. Is that the way the world is? And somewhere along the line, what happens as you do that is you discover you have power, the power to feel, the power to change, the power to decide all over again. And that the sense of that power begins to expand. And pretty soon you begin to say, what else can I do in consciousness? And Kundalini makes that a really big, any awakening moment offers that kind of really big understanding of the depth of power and what you can do with it. And then we have science that says, wow, everything responds immediately to consciousness. The energy system or the energy body responds immediately to consciousness, whether it's your consciousness or something coming at you from someone else or something else. And so there's an awareness that we need to learn to maintain. So that's part of raising consciousness. And then you begin to understand at some point, I'm going to choose where I put my attention, because attention allows you to take in information. It actually, what you're taking in is motion. You're watching stuff happen, and you're assigning a feeling to that, or you're picking up the feeling of that. So that whole process is really the, quote, the expansion of consciousness that many refer to as raising consciousness. In other words, you get out of the perceptual rut, the feeling rut, and you start deciding where you're going to put your attention. You start getting to the point of saying, I need to look at that, or I need to figure out, or I need to feel that all the way through. And if it's something that happened when you were 2, you then make decisions in 15 different directions based on that 2-year-old decision. So you might have to come back to that 2-year-old decision 15 times and realize, wow, that was a big root, and it had all kinds of branches that affected my life in 15 different ways. And doing that brings you to an awareness of your power to heal, your power to decide and do. Power is the ability to decide and do, and to then take some action. So it's that whole process. It doesn't have to be done overnight, but once you discover how powerful that process is, people go after themselves. The journey within is it's probably the most intriguing. And it's once you start that journey within, you can't stop it. It's like something begins to unfold within you, and it's the natural unfolding of the whole self. And you can't stop. And if you're married to somebody and they're not doing that, and you came together as 2 people who were not aware at all, and you're comfortable with the facade each one puts up, and one of you starts to grow past the facade and become real, who they really are, a lot of times people come apart. So yeah, it's a wonderful work. It's an exciting journey into the self, and it's one of the most rewarding journeys that there is. So the payoff is huge.
It's so interesting, because when you're talking, it's very parallel to what I have figured out in terms of my healing and development. So it's interesting that you talk about the chemicals, take you back to some root event in the past. That's exactly what I have discovered. I have discovered it through becoming triggered. So something triggers me, I become reactive, but I'm aware at this point that it's not about the thing right in front of me in the present. It goes right back, like you say, to the past. And so being triggered is an excellent tool for discovering things in your past that you can then clean up and heal. And then the other thing you said that is my experience 100% is, you don't suddenly rise to become something. I feel like we already are that, but if we take off the muck, if we unpack the suitcases full of rocks that we've been carrying around, then
Yeah.
we automatically restore ourselves to our maybe original shape and form. So it's actually doing the work to unpack that stuff. And I also add in there, like, many bad things happened to me as a child. So when I go back and open one up, I allow the emotions to come out, and then I observe. Like you say, when you're two, you will make a decision that's completely wrong, like, oh, this is my fault, or oh, I'm unworthy because that happened to me. So then I take that and I go, wait a minute, I put it like on a whiteboard and I say, wait, is this true? And then I say, well, no, but that's what I believed then because I had a 2-year-old brain. And so I will take that 2-year-old, I will see that 2-year-old, and I will take her and rock her and tell her, no, it was the bad people. They're the bad ones, not you. You didn't do anything wrong. You were innocent. You're perfect. So I also want to bring that 2-year-old out of that past and then with me in the present. And I have actually, I don't know if this sounds crazy to you, but I've built a metaphysical home that has everything children could want. So when I rescue one of them, I put them in the home. So the 2-year-old has nannies that are elephants because she's scared of people, right? And there's water with dolphins swimming in it, and there's trees, and there's a playground. So every time I go back, I take that part of me and I put it in this place that I've built for them so they can have a different experience. Therefore, me now as an adult will begin to have a different experience.
Oh, that is beautiful. And that's one of the things that I learned early on in the whole Kundalini process was that you can construct another entire reality and begin to respond to that. And I think that was part of the 10,000 selves that I discovered at one point, 20 years after the whole Kundalini thing happened, that expansion of consciousness brought me to this understanding that we not only, and I actually experienced this a number of times, we not only will move in and out of the body, and if we stay out of the body too long, we'll create another body. We will, and when we do that every night, when we go to sleep and dream, we know the body is in bed, it's laying there, it's under the covers, nice and warm and comfy. And yet we're having this full-blown, incredibly real experience in some other reality system. And we are the ones that are not only creating that, helping to create that, but helping to maintain that, or are doing it all by ourselves spontaneously. And we have a body, we have a sense of a body. And that's a natural reaction to any kind of experience. And when you have, what do they call that? Multiple personality disorder, in which an infant, let's say, gets raped, sadly, at the age of 6 months or 2 years or whatever. That child is going to disassociate. They call it disassociation. But what actually literally is happening is that child is leaving the body, creating another body that is not having that experience. And then if they can't integrate that back in and they shut the door between those two experiences, then you have multiple personality. Well, what happens literally for most people, it normally over the course of life, they're imagining this. What is consciousness doing when they're imagining that? That consciousness is literally shaping an individual, a version of yourself to operate in that reality that you are envisioning. And so the Chinese had this saying called the discovery of the 10,000 selves. And I had an experience one night in which I left the body on purpose. I was going to do some kind of work, and I got into this. I don't even, at the time, I was like, what? Where the heck am I? Because I could see 10,000, I called it the 10,000 versions of myself. And I called it that before I ever heard about the ancient Chinese teaching this principle that we have 10,000 versions of ourselves until we wake up and stop envisioning that we're off doing this instead of being present to where we are. So being present is a very, very powerful place because you stop flipping out, you stop tuning out, you stop turning off, you start tuning into where am I and what can I do with my consciousness right now, here and now. And those are some of the more advanced approaches to an expanded consciousness. But that's where we are going as a population. And the goal is to integrate all of those 10,000 versions of the self and not have your energy spun off in, thousands of different directions. And I think one of the things that is really important to understand is that each one of those, and I might have talked about this before, but I think it bears some reinforcing discussion, is that when you have multiple personality disorders, it's often more than just one. There are people who have, they call them alters, 14, 15, 16, 17 alters, alternate versions of themselves that are not communicating. And the result of research is that when they do a DNA test on one of those alters, it's different from what we'll call the normal or the dominant version of the self. Each one of those persons has different DNA. And that means that there's a different frequency set that the person has literally rearranged themselves into a whole different configuration of frequencies in order to block out, shut out something, or in the case of super soldiers, to learn how to do certain tasks that they might not otherwise know how to do, or that they might not be proud of doing, or that aren't very nice. We'll leave it at that. And so there's all sorts of things that I think we need to learn as a population about how does reality work? How does consciousness work? And there's just a lot of interesting stuff that goes along with the quote awakening or the expansion of consciousness. So, and healing is the first step. But after that healing, then it comes down to, okay, what am I going to do with myself? Who am I now? And literally choosing to become something or someone else who has a different point of view, different actions. So I think I've mentioned before that, but it bears repeating again. You have one version of yourself, for your mother, and another version of self that you have for your father, and you have another version for your teacher or your neighbor or your lover or your husband or whatever, your children. Each child pulls a different self, a different version of yourself forward. And that's a very smooth transition. We are a collection of selves, collection of DNA versions. And that is something that I think is really critical in terms of understanding. You can create all those selves. Why would you think you couldn't create anything you put your mind to?
Interesting. I know that also I studied, psychology, and they have actually done tests on people. Now they call it DID, dissociative identity disorder, but who's a multiple. And the people will have different like skin galvanic responses. They'll have different pulses. They'll have different everything. They literally are in a different body. So that's a very interesting thing. And the bad guys have deliberately done this to children where they use trauma to shatter that. And sexual abuse before the age of 5 is the primo method to shatter a person. And then they know that another altar, like you said, will come up, because that one has to split itself off to cope. And then they have done bad things by programming these different altars to be a super soldier, or to be a honeypot, or to be you name it,
Yeah.
whatever it is that they need. And I know this from having friends who are satanic ritual abuse survivors like myself. There's degrees and degrees of that splitting, but people have then, not known, for example, that another part of them is trained as a soldier. So this part isn't aware. And, even myself, when a few years ago I decided to buy a gun, just for safety, and go to the range and practice. And lo and behold, I could shoot the target right through the heart. And people were saying, "Are you sure you've never shot before?" And I said, "No." And then later I thought, oh dear, I probably have done that before. I probably have been trained, but I'm not in touch with that. But I can tell you, Penny, from experience, that this is true. So, years ago, when I was doing my work, I started to identify. So I had one version of me, like you say, that was this innocent, beautiful child. She's almost like radiating golden light, and she loves everyone and her heart is open. And then I had another part of me that would sometimes just be there. And this part would be like a teenage male warrior, and would just guns blazing, just fierce. And no one would, when I would be in that state, I'm a 5'2" woman, very petite. When I would be in that state, I used to work in the inner city in Washington, D.C. with homeless and crack addicts. And I had some encounters. I had an encounter with a drug dealer who was threatening a client of mine. And this young man was, 6'4", had a gun in his holster. And I was in that part. So I marched right up to him and said, "Hey, don't you threaten my client." And I confronted this person. And he was so stunned that he said, "Yes, ma'am." And he took a step back and, agreed to forgive the drug debt and not harm my client. People, it would seem impossible, but he wasn't seeing the 5'2", at that time I was about 25-year-old woman who looked 15. He was seeing a warrior man, right? Because that's the energetic part that I was in. So I really just wanted to validate what you were saying by actually giving you these specific examples. And that warrior part, I used to call Aries, got me through a lot of situations in life.
Yeah.
And then the little innocent girl was great in some situations, but also would get me in trouble in some situations because I was too naive, and I would step into things that I shouldn't. So I've since learned, I can identify now. They're much more integrated, but I can still identify if I'm in a certain energy or if I'm a certain other energy. And if I'm in a younger energy, I will not do certain things in the world that a young child shouldn't be doing. So I've learned to adapt in that way. So anyway, what do you think of that?
I think that, well, while you were talking, I was so aware of the breakdown of what I'm going to call the psychological model that we have used. That's, the dissociative identity disorder is that's based on ignorance of how reality works and how consciousness works. So we are slapping labels on people. We don't know how to bring them back together. And we don't know how to do exactly what you just said, which is to build a version of the self, or build a structure in consciousness that allows you to become an Aries when you need that energy. I have done that same thing and experimented based on something that happened when this was long before Kundalini, but I had a fairly abusive husband. He was very abusive, and not just to me, but to my kids. And he went after one of my children one time, and and I heard this awful sound, and I ran into the hallway, and I saw what he was doing. It's something in me turned into what I can only describe as a tiger. And I felt my mouth pull back and my teeth, were bared. And I was drilling my eyes into him, and I felt my hands were claws. And I swear to God, he took one look at me and he backed up in total fear. And I said to him, if you ever lay a hand on my children again, I'll kill you. And he was just shocked all the way through. And I had never had that kind of experience again, never had any thoughts about even hurting anybody, let alone threatening to kill them. And it was something that came out that was almost animalistic. And that I never forgot that. And later on, when I came across the 10,000 versions of the self, and I've been doing all kinds of research into dreams and study and understanding. A lot of times in dreams, people will say, well, I was with a group of people. Well, that group is all the versions of yourself that are related to this situation or this issue that you're dealing with in the dream. And at that point, I realized we're not limited to building structure in consciousness that's human. We can build structures that are animal, that are bird, that are fish, that are all sorts of characteristics that allow us to survive in situations that we might not otherwise survive in. We would collapse into something terrible is happening. And I was reading, I forget what his name is. There was a guy in Russia that was famous for his sexual escapades, and he was a friend of the king, and he was very powerful. I forget, he was some sort of mystic. And they tried to kill him again and again and again. They even threw him in the river under the ice. And I don't know, 10 minutes later, he shows up and there he is. So when I read that, I thought, I know exactly what he's doing. He's just reshaping himself to become a fish as long as he's under the ice until he finds a spot where he can come out. That sort of experience is not common. That's more shamanistic. But the message to the average person is build a new self, and expand that consciousness, explore, experiment. The old, if you get into something that I'm going to say frightens you, then you're doing a good job. Okay. Because we have so many binders and blinders and fences around the self that we're afraid to go outside the box at all. We're afraid of what other people will say or what they'll think. All this stuff. And so we stay frozen our whole life. That's not the way to grow. You can't expand consciousness without being willing to stand on your own, think for yourself, do for yourself, and be what you are naturally from moment to moment. There's no one final, sense of self. It's this extraordinary expansion in which you become all things.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for saying that, because I sometimes don't share certain things out of fear of being thought crazy, but I've done that as a child. There have been circumstances where I literally felt myself as a lion, and then I would fight back.
yeah.
And so, and people, yes, and people have asked me, well, like, how did you get away? And how did they stop, tormenting you? Well, there was a pivotal moment when I was about 16 or 17, when I was being put through yet another satanic ritual. And, and then my uncle and the priests that were there, they did something with my sister. And I snapped. It was 17 years of this. Something happened. And I became so fed up and angry that I started to raise a small tornado. That we were outside in a dusty road, and it started to swirl. And they started to lift up off the ground. And the look of terror in their face. And this voice came out of me, and I said, that's it. you will not do another thing to me or to
Wow.
anyone in my family. That's it. We're done. And, these people take children and they hone them into weapons. There's psychic abilities, then there's, super soldier, and there's that. So I got to that point where I was like, you know what? You made me a weapon, and I'm now going to use that against you because no, I'm done.
Good for
And and that was it. I was left alone after that because I just, all of this power came in me. I was like, no. And
you.
then what you say, one more little thing, what you say about animals, there was a time when I was sort of yelling at God and saying, well, where are my guides? I don't have any guides. Where are they? And then the very next time I went into meditation, all of a sudden, there were several guides, but they were all in animal form. There was a huge lion in front of me. There was a dragon behind me. There was an elephant here, a bear here, a dolphin under me in the water, and a raven on top flying. And I
Wow.
understood all these, oh, and they are like me, and they give me, so the dragon, I sometimes become the dragon and I fly and I spread, I'm this powerful being, right? And then the lion is just this heart and this courage that I have. And the elephant and the bear just protect me and give me this mothering and nurturing. And the raven told me that it was my psychic ability and my mind. And the dolphin's always been with me throughout childhood. It's been my healing and that playful, joyful self that, I didn't really get to experience much as a child. So I just wanted again to validate what you just said. And thank you for saying it because it liberated me to tell you that.
Yeah. I have to say that when you discover your guides, there will be some animals in that the animal energy that you want to have it's almost going to be amazing, like magical, like, oh my gosh, that's perfect for me. And I'm thinking about all your, the symbolism of those various guides that you mentioned. Wow. So that's the lion is the symbol of consciousness. And you'll see like in India, there are paintings and drawings of somebody who's got blue skin and wearing something all jeweled and beautiful and sitting, and they've got a tiger sitting at their feet on a leash. What is that? That's the symbol of an awakened consciousness whose consciousness is under their control. That's the big cat, whether it's a panther, a leopard, lion, a tiger, whatever it is. That is the universal symbol of consciousness and the mastery of consciousness. And the elephant is the ability to have access to all of the entire field of consciousness. The bear is healing. The dragon is the world doesn't scare me anymore. And the dolphin is the doorway into other dimensions, other worlds that may not have all that pain and stupid suffering that people get into and try to perpetrate. And the raven is that psychic ability, see it coming, do something with your consciousness. And so that it's a beautiful example for you of what you have at your disposal. So that
Yeah.
was,
And, when I was a child and I would be like put in an isolation box for days or in a cage or whatnot, I would actually, so you're validating something that I experienced because I would actually not be there. I would be in this other world.
yeah.
I
Why
would be
would you
swimming
stay
with the dolphin.
any when you put yourself to bed at night? That's the same thing as going in the box. The consciousness is always on, always awake, always looking for new experience because it is the nature of consciousness to create. And it has to create. And what it does in that creation is validate that you exist. And so your consciousness is working to validate that you exist. And when you get in the box or whether you get in bed, consciousness is like, nothing happening here. I'm out of here. And it'll come back and check about every 20, 30 minutes, every 2 hours, anything happening here? We still in the box? We still sleeping? Okay, I'm out of here. And it goes and creates another experience that we call a dream.
Wow,
So,
that's so interesting. So, as we're talking about this, I've taken some of your intuition classes, which I highly recommend to people. And so you teach people about this intuitive natural ability. So I feel like this fits in this conversation. So we naturally have intuition, and that's really a way that it's really the way we should operate, but that's sort of been erased in the world that we live in. So what talk about that, about intuition, and how can people get that back, and what do you do? Some people say, well, meditate, and that's how you do it. So like, just basically all of the above. How do we work with that natural part of us that's been unnaturally sort of suppressed?
yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so there's so many ways to get that natural intuition back. I think the first thing that I would say is you have to face your fears. Now, when I was young, I was I had a wonderful life. I cannot imagine the kind of life you had. Um, but I had a wonderful life and I was still full of fears. Full, of everything. Didn't matter what. I was especially afraid of the truth. Anything that was going to interfere with what I wanted, I considered that to be a threat. And the truth was, I want this. I'm going after this. I'm having this. And and so blindly, I would move forward with this insistence on having my way without looking at anybody else, without listening to anybody else, without talking or discussing what I wanted and where it fit and did it make sense and was it possible and what was I going to do, from there if I got it, what then, all of that, and there was this terrible fear of being hurt, of seeing too much, of knowing too much. And so in my early years, I worked very hard to shut all that off because the world was such a painful place. And I had loving parents. They didn't fight. They didn't drink. They didn't argue. They didn't hit us. They never yelled at us. We worked hard. We worked hard together. We played hard. We prayed hard. We went to church a lot. And that was just the way our family was. However, I still had this load of fears. And so the first thing you have to become aware of is that if you want to develop your intuition, you have to face your fears. What were some of those fears I had? What I didn't really start facing them until I was 30 years old. But the fears are, is this, what if I drive this car and I have an accident? Or what if I borrow this money and I can't pay it back? What if I marry somebody and he turns out to be awful? Or he doesn't take care of me, because back then you belonged to your husband. And I was taught that literally. You had to do what your husband said, and you didn't have hardly any rights as a woman. So in the process of becoming intuitive, what I had to face was the fact that my husband was abusive, that we were in debt to the eyeballs, that I didn't have much of a plan, and the plan I had was totally unrealistic. And so those are the common things that most people have to deal with. First, the fears. And then when you finally get to the point where you're willing to look at what's happening and you realize that's what's happening, and I'm not fooling myself, and I'm not trying to shield myself from any pain, and I'm not lying to myself, you reach this point of clarity. That point of clarity is another enemy in terms of developing intuition. And you think, okay, I see. And you begin to see precognitively. And then what's the trap there is that you can see all the options. Okay. But if you see one and you think, oh, that's it, and then you follow that and it turns out badly, you're like, oh, whoops. I should have looked to see if there were other options that were better. And so learning to choose, getting clear enough to be able to go through the various scenarios and watch their outcome, that you have to be courageous enough to do that. And then finally you come to your own power and you will misuse it, you will stumble, and but you learn. And then finally you're in a place where you begin to understand, how does consciousness actually work? What if this is a set of frequencies, how do they behave? What is their interactive potential? How do I change my feeling state? Some of that can be done with breath work. Some of that can be done with, just putting your attention elsewhere. You sort of divide your perception, like say somebody is yelling at you, complaining or threatening you, and you're over here focused on a little tiny vase of flowers that you picked in the garden 2 days ago, and they're just beautiful, and you're focused on that. You're listening and you're trying to respond, but that's not all that's happening. So there's this beautiful vase of flowers over here. It's kind of like the splitting. We talked without the splitting. So intuition eventually becomes a way of life. And one of the dynamics that is really important to understand is that when you want to become intuitive, you have to allow yourself to feel. And you'll feel all of the stuff you've been trying to hide. Okay, all of it. And you're in this feeling state, and there's this I'm going to say this experience, we'll call it, of having I'll say somebody comes in the room, or somebody calls on the phone, or you have a memory of something. What literally happens when that person comes in the room is you leave the body, become that person for a split second, know them 100%, and then you come back to being yourself. If it's a phone call, you become this auditory bridge that allow your auditory input to make you aware of what that other person is feeling, all kinds of subtle tones, choice of words, cadence, pitch, rhythm, all of that. It gives you a very clear picture of what's going on with that person. And they might only say hello, and you've got it. And then if it's a memory, you literally go back in time, you reorganize yourself to become that person that you were back then momentarily. And that's how we remember. That's literally remembering. The remembering is the ability of the brain to give directions for you to reorganize your state of consciousness to match the way you were at 16 or 23 or 35 or whatever. And you literally become that frequency set again. And the benefit of doing that is you have the additional wisdom that you have gained. So we often say, I wish I knew then what I know now. Well, go back there and be that person and bring all that wisdom that you've gained with you. They're not mutually exclusive. So those are just some of the ways of becoming more intuitive. Silence, absolute and utter silence. I live in a pool of silence. And so what happens is it's, very, very silent. I don't have all these voices and old tapes and old do's and don'ts running through my head all the time. And so what happens when, say, somebody is thinking of me or is going to contact me is that there'll be this frequency that comes through that nice silent region around me. It's like a moat. I call it my pool of peace, but it's like a moat around me. And when that water brings a frequency of somebody, I'll think, oh, there's so-and-so. And sure enough, usually within a couple of days, they'll call me. Sometimes I will send a message And sure enough, within a few days, somebody will contact me. That's the using of intuition. That's the knowing how to use consciousness. And it's the knowing, intuition is knowing from within instead of allowing whatever's going on out there to present to you something that is passes for knowing. Okay, it's observation. But if you haven't directly observed it and you haven't felt it and you don't know it, then you're guessing. So, and most people are afraid to ask. They're afraid they're going to be rude. You know, they don't say, "What's going on with you? Are you okay? You know, what
Yeah.
do you need right now?"
That's
So,
so interesting because so one of the reasons that that one of the ways that I've been able to be very good in as a healer helping people is because I used to sort of explain it like I ingest them and
there
I
you
know
go.
them, right?
Yeah,
And I
it,
feel and I would just know things, that it would just be there. But then, with societal conditioning, you think, oh no, maybe I'm crazy, that's not true. But I've become more and more trusting of that. And it is what you say too. Like, I swear every single time I think of someone, they come into my sphere somehow. So I've developed now, if I have a conflict with someone, I talk to their soul. I talk to them, metaphysically, and I work it out. And I will get from them an understanding back. And then I'll go, oh, that's why they blah, blah, blah. So I will resolve it there. And then 100% of the time, at some point, like you say, the person shows back up and something has shifted, right?
that's right. That's
And
exactly right.
and actually, I did that when I had emailed you about, the schedule for the interview, and then you hadn't responded for a few days. I actually mentally said, Penny, can you let me know what time we're gonna talk today? And then hours later, I turn on my computer and there's your email. So this is really, really real. And I want to say something extra because I want your opinion on this. So I also feel like if I have a negative thought about someone, that it is affecting them somehow, right? Same with a positive thought, because I've done the positive and the negative. And actually, so I asked and I said, to my higher self, to God, whatever, and I said, please don't let me think negatively about people. And I was taking a hike somewhat recently, and my brain started to go into somebody who hurt me, a negative thought about this person, and a bee stung me in the butt. I was like, ow, and then I thought, oh, but I asked, alerted if I'm doing it so I don't do it. So that all makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that is so funny. Yeah, people have problems. The biggest problem is if you very, very easily, I'm going to use your word, ingest somebody, you become them. You literally expand to become them for a minute. They fail to come back to who they were. They bring that whole person back with themselves, and now they've got all that person's stress and issues and physical problems and what have you. And so the empath has a great deal of difficulty because they don't have really good boundaries. You have to be present to yourself. And when you're going to, get to know somebody else, you tune in or you know them or you call them or you whatever you're going to do. And then you have to come back to being yourself. It will change you a little bit because the interaction of consciousness is so dynamic, so beautifully dynamic. But the empath can't even find who they were originally. Sometimes for days, they will wander around in a funk, be all upset, be depressed, be worried, etc. And they just haven't learned to, okay, let go of other people. And why do they not let go? It's because they don't have enough of themselves. They haven't built enough of their house, what I call the rock, the rock within. You have to have enough of yourself to hold yourself up and to hold yourself together. And so people that are really wishy-washy, they need pieces of other people and they take them and then they suffer. So because the pieces don't fit them nearly as well as if they had more pieces of themselves. So, and I find people who have terrible egos, that's the problem. That is the base problem. They don't have enough of themselves. And so they try to literally consume everybody and everything around them on purpose. And that becomes a habitual attitude toward people. They become users, and sometimes worse, a lot worse.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I used to have an issue with taking on, like you say, other people's stuff and
Oh,
holding it in my body just
yep.
because of empathy. So I had to learn boundaries really well. But one thing I've noticed is if there's, like you just said in the example, but if there's something about the other person that I sort of know and it begins to affect me, it's usually because there's a resonance with something unhealed inside of me. So
Yeah,
I now use that again, like I use triggers, I use that to go, well, wait, why is that kind of grabbing me? Oh, there's something in me I need to look at that they're reflecting, right?
absolutely.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's true. We get irritated with somebody or we pick up on something that exists in somebody and it does resonate in us. And if you're not aware of what that resonance is and what the root of that is, what the base of that is, you can get into some trouble. On the other hand, you can also do exactly what you said is like, okay, why am I attracted to that person? What is it in them? Why, or why do they irritate the bejabbers out of me? And so you end up going to look at that and let yourself feel that whole irritation or that whole emotion, whatever it is, and all the aspects of that. And then you'll be able to figure out, okay, that's what that's about. Do I need to do that for me? I think I do. Do I need to shift that, or change that in myself? I think I do. I think I will. I will often say, okay, I'm going I'm going to shift into this kind of attitude or this, I'm going to pretend that I think this way and I'm going to do that for a couple of days and see where that takes me. And it's amazing what you can learn about yourself and others and about the reality if you just sit with something for a couple of days and then let go of it. It's a very, very powerful education that allows you to see even further and deeper into yourself and into others. So,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to experiment with becoming some other version of yourself for a short time, but be sure that you integrate that back in.
And I've made it a rule for myself because I've gotten myself in trouble enough times that I learned where if somebody irritates me, I can write really well and I can speak really well in terms of like just getting them, just fighting back. And
Yep,
so I've had to sort of control that. And so when something or someone's irritating me, I have a rule that I can't respond for a few days. So I won't respond to an email. I won't respond. I will get off the phone. I will stop the conversation so that I can have time to, like you just said, to see, well, what is this? Is this me? Why is this irritating me? And then inevitably, 99% of the time, once I do that process, it evaporates and I'm not irritated anymore.
that's right. And that brings up something that I'm not sure I'm going to say this so that everybody will understand it, but when an instant answer comes up from outside yourself, it's likely to not be the answer. We have all been trained to have instant gratification, to look out there and say, oh yeah, that's it. And we jump to these conclusions. The process of wisdom, becoming wise, of becoming healthy, of getting to the point where you understand the whole thing or as much of it as you possibly can. That is it's a slow process. It's like watching bread raise, if you've ever made bread. It's a slow process. There isn't anything instant. Now, sometimes an insight will come instantly, and that will help in the process. But a lot of times it's just what you said. You have to sit with it for a few days. What is this? Why? Where's this coming from? Do I want to do something? What's the whole feeling? The whole feeling, not a little piece over here that you're comfortable feeling, but the whole thing. And that leaves you much wiser, much more able to see inside all of the transactions that are happening. And I will say this, the more you open up and are able to see what's happening, the more you're going to cry, the more you will feel that incredible, what is the problem with so many people? Why are we doing this? Why can't they see it doesn't have to be this way? And so you have to carry that knowledge that it doesn't have to be this way while you, for each individual, devise your own way of going through the world, navigating, and having an impact that changes things, and having developing techniques and tones of voice and word patterns that can allow you to interact instantly with somebody who's irritating, you to no end. There are ways to get, to back off for a minute and then get very, very deep inside yourself and ask yourself a question, and then maybe share that question with the other, whoever it is irritating you. And you literally, if we have a few more guts, we could say, wow, let's say we're talking with Susie. Susie, wow, I had to back off for a moment. I'm feeling so like my world is upside down, and I'm trying to figure out what you're saying. Is that coming from you, or is that a response in me? And so it's a joint discovery effort, and it breaks that irritation pattern, or that pattern of ignorance, or that pattern of I can just say whatever I want and I don't have to pay attention to what the other person is going through. That's not an aware world. And yet we don't have the word patterns and the conversational techniques that allow us to fix that argument right there, right on the spot. So that's
Yeah.
kind of sad, but yeah, be ready to feel more. And that includes the grief over what's happening in the world. And eventually you come to this place where you see all the good stuff that's coming to be. And you're realizing that, oh yeah, that, the education system, that does need to come apart because it dumbed down everybody. Nobody knows anything. And if you watch that guy who goes around on the streets and asks people,
Oh, yeah.
where's Ukraine, or where's South America, or, and they're like, and they point to something, it's just so funny. It's sad. And then there's a whole problem with the medical system. They don't really, they only understand the body from one angle, and that's the chemical, biological angle. They don't really understand it from what I'm going to call the frequency angle, or the physics angle. Then there's the whole problem with the government, the financial system. All that has to come apart. Don't get caught up in worrying about that. Just watch and learn, because what's going to come out of that is this beautiful other world that is much more, it's much more in alignment with what I'm going to call the spirit of what we have become, which is an awakened population. And we can't have that old system because, it was built by people who are counting on us to be unawakened, and that's not working anymore. And it's failing a lot of people. So,
And
yeah.
it was designed to harm, to enslave,
Yeah.
starting with enslaving consciousness and all the way down. And so we've been conditioned for generations to obey authority, this thing out here. Even religion does that. They take this natural God or source energy and then they make it into something out here, and then
Right.
you have to go through the priest who gets, who then tells you what to. So it's this whole acculturation of looking out here for permission, for authority, and not looking in here to the ultimate authority.
Oh my
So
God. Yeah,
I think that whole paradigm has to go.
I think it does. And what's going to upset a lot of people is when you have an entire paradigm based on centralized control, and then along comes this idea of decentralized, then what you begin to see if you move over to the decentralized position is that everything, and that includes God, government, money, schools, water, electricity, transport, business, art, science, technology, everything in the centralized concept, in the centralized paradigm, that you have to let go of that. And most people are willing to let go of some of the easier things. But when it comes to God and money and government, they're a little bit less sure of how that's going to unfold. And it is going to unfold beautifully. You have to know that in the same way that you hold yourself together, we'll hold ourselves together as a big population. We'll take care of one another.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
money, they call it currency, which is energy, electricity, right? So
Yes.
it's been created as this symbol for our life force energy. But really, if you stop to think about it, it's a piece of paper. It itself is not anything. And so all this, we have built everything beautiful on this earth, you know, we we used to grow our own food, we used to build our own homes, we used to make our own clothing, and we've been infantilized deliberately, and all that's been outsourced because that way we can be controlled by scarcity and maybe the lack of these things. And money, that whole debt usury system, is it's a fake thing. We don't even have to live in that. I remember reading the Bible. Jesus went to those money lenders and flipped over their tables and was angry about this system, which, evidently he wasn't able to stop it. But what do you think about that?
Yeah. I think here we are again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing. Yeah. And I think, people are freaking out. Oh, what if this falls apart? Well, yeah, if you planned your life, excuse me, around the idea that you're going to get a job and you're going to do something that you really don't want to do and don't like doing for 30 years so you can retire and finally do what you want and have enough money. And then that money goes away and you have to keep working. That's going to upset some people that have this habit of thinking, I'm too old. I'm too old. That's crap. It's crap. You're never too old for anything. And there's no reason to get old and decrepit. Just enjoy life. Begin to build yourself a little business. Do something to help humanity. Do something to help your family. Whatever. We have so much creativity that is locked up inside of us, and we're not using it. It's going to come out over this next 5 years.
Yeah,
And it's
by necessity. It'll have to, right? And sometimes by necessity is a good thing because it makes some ability of ours come forth. But as you're talking, I was remembering I spent some time living in the Amazon in Peru in the jungle with a tribe. They didn't have any money. I mean, not one coin, no money. And they built their dwellings from the leaves and the wood in the jungle. They would go get bananas or other fruits. The Amazon River was there. They would fish, they would hunt, they would spend maybe 3 hours a day thatching up a roof or hunting or cooking. And the rest of the time, they were laughing and dancing and move and just together. Their tribe was together. And I remember being so struck by how happy these people were. And they didn't even own two articles of clothing. Some might have just a t-shirt, some might have just some shorts, no shoes, nothing. Their quality of life was far superior to our modern Western life because we've been tricked into, and they work 3 hours a day for all their basics, and we work 18 a day. And then we're still scrambling and running. And then think about it this way. So we we put this life force energy, and we do, like you said, something we don't like. We produce something for the fat cat at the top of the corporation or the structure, and then we go home. Then they take a third of that from us in the form of theft, which is taxes. But then even what's left, you go back to their corporations and spend your money on their products. What is this? If that isn't slavery, then I don't really know what is.
Oh, I call it stupidity. It's like, are you seeing how this works? No, a lot of people do not. It's just the way it always was. They don't question it. We are questioning. A lot of people standing up saying, hey, something wrong here. This is not working. And I'm like, yeah, don't try to take anybody's house away, because, if your system isn't working, that's your problem, not ours.
Right.
Stay away from my stuff. So we're coming to this place, I think, where we're really needing to envision a whole new world, a whole new way of being. Actually, I developed a little thing. If you want to share it, it's what do you do when you want to shift your consciousness? And just add something beautiful to the world, because every thought you have, everything you project out there changes the entire soup, the entire cosmos of energies. And when you insert that in, it's just like I'm going to say, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. If you put a teaspoon of sugar, which I don't advise, but in a cup of coffee, and stir it in, it disperses and it changes the coffee throughout. It's the same thing that happens when we put a thought out there. All of what's out there responds to that, and maybe our thought is kind of puny, and maybe it doesn't hold very much in the dynamics, which are there's a lot of forces. Those dynamics may wipe out your little thought, but if you keep putting it out there and you start getting other people joining in, then what you get is this massive reorganization of that frequency and that's what makes up a reality system. So our reality system is made by us, it's maintained by us, it's changed by us. And the fools who think they're going to do it and they're going to maintain everything, they have some big lessons coming. So
but that's a good full circle here, because now we're back kind of to the beginning of what we were talking about. And it's reminding me of how you talked about, like, we have these different bodies that we create, right? Well, I've done this where I've imagined myself the way that I want to be: peaceful, balanced, compassionate. And I envision that version of me. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like by doing that, eventually that version of me and this version of me, it becomes this version of me. So based on that and what you're saying, we can create the new earth, a different, better reality, by doing exactly that. We can envision it. We can start by sitting quietly and daydreaming the way that it could be, and then we'll get ideas and creativity, and then we can take one of those ideas and go implement it in the world, right? And so this is what the dark ones never wanted us to discover, that actually we are supremely powerful. We are in the image of our creator, meaning we are also creators. And they have manipulated our minds through extensive mind control and poisoning of all of our body to create a hell on earth, because that's what these people are. They worship death and destruction and suffering. So, but we we did it. They tricked us into doing it, but we did it. So if we did that, guess what? We can do something completely different, right?
Exactly. You know, if we did it, we can undid it. So that's bad English. Undoing is really not necessary. You just build anew. And just like you said, daydream, think about, well, you know, what can I do? What would I do differently? You know, a lot of people write to me and say, I'm in this, you know, what can I do? How do I change this, that, or whatever? It's like put your attention somewhere else. Do something different with where you're pointing your attention. And that's going to change how your frequencies are. And that will change your feeling. Your feeling is produced by the chemicals that arise from the frequencies. So, you know, you have a perception or a thought or a desire that changes your frequencies. The frequencies produce the chemistry creates the feeling and the propensity, the mood, the attitude of whatever it is. You know, it could be good, bad, or indifferent. But you can't have a feeling without the appropriate frequency state and the chemicals it produces. So, bottom line.
Yeah. So to sum up kind of what you're saying is um, pay attention to what is in you. What
Yep.
thoughts are you having? What emotions are you having?
Yeah.
Go into that root. Where did that get born? Where did that start? Why is that a pattern? Like I said, that groove in your brain, because it's, you know, it's been reinforced all your life. Deal with that. Feel the emotion, let it go. Take the thoughts, put them on a whiteboard, correct them. Reframe the thought, the cognition. No, actually, I'm not unworthy. I'm very worthy. You know, then begin to create the new version of you, the new. So focus your thoughts on how, you know, I sometimes get despairing about what's out there. And then I look at today, the sun is out and it's warm. And I just feel that. I feel the sun caressing my skin. And I'm so grateful for this beautiful day. And that changes my frequency right there. So
It does.
we begin to do that, right? And
Yep.
so, and add anything else beyond that as the formula for us to go forward. So heal the old, reframe it, create what you want new within yourself or out there. And why don't you leave us with kind of a final bit of wisdom from Penny Kelly?
Well, let me share I got this little thing that maybe people
Yes.
might want to hear. This is what I tell people when they say, how do I change my consciousness?
Okay.
So, you know, I tell people, close your eyes for just a moment and, you know, put your attention somewhere else besides the room that you're in. And I'll tell people, by putting your attention on your right foot and try to feel that foot. There's so many areas of the body we neglect and forget. We forget we have them. And then once you're fully feeling that foot, ask yourself, well, where else can I put attention? And then shift your attention to the sounds outside, anything coming from outside the room that you're in. That could be outside the house, like birds, traffic, sirens, airplanes, equipment working, or if it's something happening in another room, maybe you can hear a TV or radio or, you know, people talking or whatever. But just focus on that, you know, that the space around you. And then after you tune into that or hear that for a moment, shift your attention, just pick an arbitrary date in the future. So maybe May 7th, 2024, or June 21st, 2024. Just put your attention there and see what you see. You know, if you see something that looks interesting, watch it. If you see something that looks negative, then imagine waving a magic wand over it and fixing it. And then imagine yourself doing some exercises like lifting weights or doing push-ups or whatever, some kind of movement. And then shift again. And imagine that you're having coffee and some quiet conversation with somebody. And then move your attention to doing something that you love. What would you be doing with your life and yourself if you could do anything you wanted? Something you love to do, and focus there for just a moment and become aware of the difference between the way you go about doing something you love and the way that you usually go about doing things. Is there a similarity or is there a big difference there? And then imagine that you're actually out in space. Shift your attention so that you pretend you're way out in space and you can see the whole planet. And it's bathed in this beautiful pink golden light. And be aware that, if we're in this light, that be aware that you're holding the knowing for the whole planet that we're not going to have this sudden, I don't know what to call it, this sudden win or this sudden resolution of everything in which the good guys in the white hats ride off into the sunset and we all live happily ever after. Be aware that the task is to hold an attitude. The task is to, be able to come up with a vision, maybe an idea of a good life or, some sort of mood or some insistence. And that insistence gets you to stand there like a rock. And you're unmoving, you're unflappable, you're insisting on the life you want from within, and then see that pink golden mist that you were seeing just a little bit ago around the planet. See that falling from the skies, coming down to the planet, right to the surface, engulfing everybody. And as it does, everybody calms down. Everybody gets healed. And there's this great burst of creativity that comes from everyone. And watch that for just a moment and then say thank you. Try to feel that gratitude and then bring your attention back to wherever you're doing, whatever you're doing. If you're, washing your socks or doing your dishes or whatever. And so it's a practice exercise for shifting your attention and shifting it in ways that don't have anything spectacular or specific that you have to do, just shift. And what happens as you do that is that becomes a new habit. So, yeah, so I would say, in closing, this is our reality. This is our system. This is our place. And we're making it and we can change it. And so don't freak out. Instead, wake up, use your consciousness. So
That's beautiful, Penny. Thank you so much. I could keep talking,
oh,
but we've been going for almost 2 hours, so I think we'll nip it for today, and then we'll just do more of this. So thank you so much for coming here and having this conversation with me, and thank you for being someone who guides people right now at this time. Because we need as many of us who have you've done your work. I mean, not that it ever ends, there's always improvement. I mean, but you've done so much and you've had that Kundalini awakening and you've written amazing books and you're able to really bring some wisdom and tools, whether it be nourishing the physical body properly, whether it be the metaphysical or consciousness. You've really put out so much good information. So thank you for that, and I encourage people to go look you up and, I can put any links you want, like to your website or anything in the description so people can find you. If people don't know, you do look-sees where you kind of look out into the future and what are it's not fixed, but you kind of explore what are the potentials, right? So
right.
you're an invaluable human being on this planet. I absolutely adore you, as does everyone I know. So thank you so much for today, Penny. Thank
Oh,
you.
you're
I
so
really appreciate it.
welcome. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I thank you. And for those listening, we're in a wonderful time. It's a time finally of getting out from under. So, get a hold of yourself and let's go. Okay.
Excellent. Yes,
All
we're going to
right.
do that.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you,
you for
Jenny.
inviting me. I appreciate it.